Right, so having had around 6 weeks to recover somewhat during the course of the Gaza ceasefire, to elicit repairs or replace military supplies, beef their defences up again, especially with Donald Trump handing them more heavy weaponry than ever before, Israel's air defences, as being ably demonstrated by the Houthis of Yemen, still getting bypassed. We've seen strike upon strike target Ben Gurion airport. We've seen the sirens being sounded across Israel night after night. And now reports that the Houthis have managed to infiltrate Israeli airspace by drone without setting those sirens off at all? What's going on here? What is the state of the Iron Dome then? Have Israel fixed it, or have they abandoned it? Or have the Houthis simply rendered it obsolete and are just getting around it? Right, so the resumption of Israel's military operations in Gaza following the collapse of ceasefire negotiations has been met with renewed resistance from the Houthis of Yemen. We know all this already, don't we? I've reported on it several times. It all began again, of course, whilst Israel was blockading aid into Gaza, didn't it? The Houthis gave them a deadline of 4 days, an ultimatum to end the blockade, or they would resume blockading Israeli shipping in the Red Sea. Well, the 4 days passed. Israel didn't budge. The Houthis put their blockade back in place, and despite not having actually blocked a single ship, Trump decided to launch the first of what have now been several airstrikes on Yemen, notably the capital Sana'a, aided by the UK to my eternal shame. Hundreds of civilians killed as a result. Following the collapse of that Gaza ceasefire by Israel's hand, the Houthis have since resumed their nightly rocket attacks across Israel as well now. Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion Airport becoming a regular target for them. And they've been able to reach Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion Airport at that too. A 2,500 kilometre distance from Sana'a as that is, in the northern half of Israel as that is, crossing much Israeli airspace to reach as that does. And yet the Houthis are doing so time after time, even if their rockets are, as it is claimed, being brought down in the end by Israeli forces. The thing is, if Israel's air defences were working as they once did, the Houthis shouldn't be able to get anything like that far, could they? They weren't initially, were they? When the Iron Dome was working better, they weren't getting anywhere close to that. Despite those relentless US airstrikes on Yemen, the Houthis continue to launch hypersonic and ballistic missiles and drones deep into Israeli territory, striking at sensitive targets like Ben Gurion International Airport, like capital Tel Aviv. So what's the deal with these air defences then? Where are they? Are they still in existence? Are Israel's air defences still so weakened from prior engagements, Israel not having repaired them? They prioritised other military aid. They decided, oh well, our civilians don't warrant this protection anymore. No replacement parts available for them. Like the boiler adverts we see on TV. They don't make the parts anymore. Or no longer have they got the bits to bring offline batteries back online. Or have the Houthis just simply developed tactics now that have just rendered them ineffective, and they're simply getting around that technology now? I thought their air defences were cutting edge. Well, let's start with the airport. One of the most significant Houthi successes has been their repeated targeting of Ben Gurion Airport, Israel's primary aviation hub, basically having rendered it unsafe. And of course, I covered this in more detail the other day, that the Houthis were effectively declaring a blockade of Israel's skies now, by threatening not just the airport, but airlines choosing to fly to it. And I postulated that they needn't necessarily fire another rocket as a result. They got a blockade in place effectively, though clearly they've carried on firing them anyway. And they've been reaching the airport every single time too. Debris from the most recent strike yesterday, which Israel intercepted, with 2 ballistic missiles having scattered shrapnel across civilian areas. On multiple occasions, ballistic missiles have forced the airport to suspend operations. It's not until they're reaching the airport that Israel are managing to stop them, disrupting both civilian and military logistics as this does so. The fact that these strikes continue despite Israel's apparently advanced Iron Dome air defence system, and it's not the only air defence system in place either. They've got the Arrow defence system, they've got the David Sling defence system as well. But they're not working. They're not stopping these missiles from crossing most of Israel to reach Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. So this suggests one of 2 possibilities. Either that Israel's air defences are still degraded from prior conflicts from before the Gaza ceasefire, including earlier Houthi attacks, including Hezbollah rocket barrages from the north, including attacks from Iraq's Islamic resistance as well as Hamas. Or, and this will be far more concerning I would imagine to most Israelis, is the possibility that the Houthis have simply adapted again and can now simply evade what was purported to be state-of-the-art air defence. What happened to the US's THAAD defence system as well? That doesn't seem to be doing anything either. Favouring that latter notion is the claims being made by the Houthis themselves, it has to be said. This is the claim coming from them, that some Houthi drones have reportedly reached central Israel without triggering sirens at all, indicating either a failure in early warning detection in air defences or the Houthis can now simply evade them should they wish. Aside from Ben Gurion Airport, which given the repeated strikes on it you'd figure Israel would get better at repelling such attacks, wouldn't you? Houthi missiles have also been targeting and reaching areas of Tel Aviv before being intercepted. While Israel claims these interceptions as successes, the Houthis still claim their objectives have been achieved. They always say that. It's always the language, isn't it? Even with Israel claiming a win here, though, they really aren't. The intercepted missiles still pose a threat, as falling shrapnel can cause damage and injuries in civilian areas. And then there's the psychological impact as well, which is significant. Undermining Israel's claims of invulnerability, people having to scramble for shelter often in the middle of the night. Israelis simply don't feel safe anymore. So with the Houthis claiming their objectives are being achieved, though are they deliberately ensuring their missiles are being intercepted here near populated zones just to maximise civilian fear rather than cause damage? It's a thought I've opined on before. The Houthis, having risked their own lives to rescue crews from damaged shipping in the Red Sea, damaged by their hands. So if they have no issues with civilian casualties, why would they do things like that? It just doesn't seem to be... doesn't seem to make sense to my mind that they would deliberately target civilians. It would make them as bad as Israel for a start as well. So is their aim more psychological than anything else? Do let me know your thoughts on all of that. It certainly isn't something being reciprocated by pro-Israel forces attacking Yemen, of course. But the US claimed previous attacks have been to target Houthis' weapons depots. Too often the strikes have been on places like Sana'a and Hodeidah, where far more harm has been done to civilians than the Houthis. Because, let's be honest, they don't know where the Houthis are, do they? Apparently the idea now, though, is to try and target Houthi leaders, and yet if they can't find out where the weapons are to target them, which continue to be fired towards Israel, of course, how can they find anything else in Yemen, let alone the leaders? The US lacks intelligence on Yemen. They tried infiltrating the Houthis last year, and in less than a day, their spies have been found and sent packing. Even the mainstream Murdoch press has said the US is basically on a hiding to nowhere here. A quote from the Times reading, "The key elements of the Biden administration's offensive were to deter and degrade. The difference with what we are seeing now, there does seem to be more willingness to conduct targeted strikes on Houthi leadership," said Adam Barron, a Yemen expert and a fellow at the New America think tank. There have been a few mid-level people killed, he said. Judging from the administration's rhetoric, it doesn't seem for a lack of trying. Let's not forget the Houthis are pretty good at hiding. The Houthis had insisted they would stop their attacks only when Israel ended the war in Gaza and had suspended their campaign during a ceasefire that unravelled this month. If Trump hopes to establish deterrence by ending the attacks on his terms, as Biden had sought to, or by forcing the Houthis' Iranian patrons to rein them in, he risks the opposite outcome. Of course, if the US is going to escalate against the Houthis, that goes both ways, doesn't it? Once again, the Houthis have escalated attacks on US warships in the Red Sea, notably the Harry S. Truman, demonstrating their ability to project power beyond Israel and, embarrassingly for the US, keep on firing at Israel all at the same time. The forces issued a statement on Wednesday declaring that their missile, drone and naval units had jointly executed a military operation targeting hostile warships in the Red Sea, including the American aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman, from which aggression against Yemen was being launched. The confrontation persisted for several hours, with Yemeni forces actively engaging and managing developments within the operational area, they added. Separately, the troops launched drone strikes against Israeli military sites in the occupied city of Jaffa near Tel Aviv, with several armed, unmanned aerial vehicles. And then, of course, there is the Trump administration just giving the Houthis a hand whether they want one or not. Most recently, a classified Houthi strike plan was accidentally sent to the Atlantic magazine's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, via a group chat on the social media platform Signal that he'd accidentally been included in, which included Trump's dumbass of a sidekick J.D. Vance and the Fox News cast-off turned Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. The sharing of this plan being a violation of the US Espionage Act, so someone's head ought to roll, and if not, well, that'll be Trump playing favourites again and handing out pardons, I suppose. Such incompetence is par for the course for those Trump surrounds himself with. He can't stand not being perceived as the smartest person in the room, so it's a really, really low bar to be a Trump Klingon, isn't it? Israel's inability to fully neutralise Houthi strikes, combined with the US's ineffective bombing campaigns, imply the Houthis are here to stay and will carry on regardless of what the US do. It's built into their systems, isn't it? Or what Israeli air defences don't do or can't do at that. If the US wanted to do something that was actually effective, They'd tell Israel to get out of Gaza. The Houthis would stop firing at everybody then, wouldn't they? But we all know that isn't going to happen, is it? For more on the Houthis' ability to shut down Ben Gurion airport and their declaration to have closed Israeli airspace, check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you have not already done so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid, therefore. Cheers, folks.